Welcome back to the Lily and Sam Show. This is our second installment in the deep dive into Olga of Kiev. This next source is from the medievalreporter.com. It's their article on Olga. And I'm going to get right into it. Please like and share and comment. I did get the new mic, so hopefully the sound is better than the previous videos. But I appreciate you being here very much. Thank you. So let's get right into this. Olga of Kiev. Okay. She ruled the Rus, a medieval people in Ukraine related to the Vikings, for over 15 years. She is primarily known for her Christianizing influence on the Rus lands during her later years in power. But the start of her regency is just as compelling a story. Very compelling. She became leader of the Rus because her husband, the Grand Prince, was atrociously killed by the Drevlian tribe while their son was still an infant. Obsessed with revenge, Olga's early reign was consumed by systemic and ruthless payback campaign against the Drevlians. The Kievan Rus. The area that would later become Ukraine was under frequent attack during the 9th and 10th century CE. With the Viking Age in full swing, Scandinavian raiders known as Varangians came sailing down the Dnieper River. At first they only came to trade, but it took a couple of decades for these mercantile expeditions to grow into aggressive invasions. The Vikings turned on the local Slav population. By 882, the Varangians seized Kiev. Their leader proclaimed himself Grand Prince of Kiev and started carving out an empire in Eastern Europe. The state he founded and expanded is called the Kievan Rus state. To distinguish it from Russia, which was a much younger country, tracing its stately roots back to the 13th century CE at the earliest. A meeting between Varangian and Slavs. A meeting between Varangian Vikings and Slavs. The former conquered many of the latter during the 9th and 10th century CE. One of the local tribes, the Drevlians, was among the Slavs subjugated by the Rus. They even fought for their new overlords, going as far as conducting war against the mighty Byzantine Empire for them. But when the Rus' Grand Prince died in 912, the Drevlians stopped cooperating and halted their tribute payments to Kiev. This is what I was talking about earlier. They hadn't been making payments, so when Igor went to try to get the payments, he got a payment, and then he decided it wasn't enough, considering they hadn't been making their payments for so long, that he went back. So it was not a breaking of the tree ties. It was, hey, you owe us more than just this. So that was my issue with the earlier source. The new Rus Grand Prince was Olga's husband, Igor. He spent much of his reign fighting the superpowers of his time. Igor launched another Kievan Rus attack against the Byzantines, twice reaching their capital, Constantinople, but failing to besiege it successfully. Later, he plundered territories of the Abbasid Caliphate around the Caspian Sea. Finally, by 945, he deemed the time was right to settle internal matters. He attacked the Drevlians to extract new tribute payments from them. Confronted by Igor's much larger army, the Drevlians gave in. They agreed to resume tribute payments to the Rus. On the way home, however, Igor felt unsatisfied. He thought there was more to extort from this tribe and turned back to increase his demands, this time accompanied by only a small retinue. The Drevlians were enraged by his oppressive commands, and now unimpressed by his small following, overwhelmed and promptly murdered him in a gruesome manner. So here's the gruesome manner. They had bent down 2 birch trees to the prince's feet and tied them to his legs. Then they let the trees straighten again, thus tearing the prince's body apart. Pretty rough. Byzantine historian and chronicler Leo the Deacon, 10th century CE, So that's from his chronicle. Okay, so Igor is dead now. Grand Princess Olga of Kiev. The son and successor of Igor, Svatoslav, was only 3 years old at the time. In need of new leadership, his mother, Olga, ruled the Kievan Rus in his stead as a regent. She would lead the state for 15 years as Grand Princess. Her first order of business was to take revenge for the killing of her husband. The Drevlians, on the other hand, emboldened by their seemingly successful uprising, I wouldn't call it that, added insult to injury. They sent a delegation to Olga, which proposed that she marry the leader of the Drevlians, Prince Mal. Little did they know. The Drevlians thus hoped to accomplish two things: to prevent the retaliatory counterstrike by Kiev through a marriage alliance, and to improve their status within the Rus state, achieving equality with the Varangians rather than remaining their subjects. Olga, sensing an opportunity, responded to the embassy. "Your proposal is pleasing to me. Indeed, my husband cannot rise again from the dead. But I desire to honor you tomorrow in the presence of my people. Return now to your boat. I shall send for you on the morrow, and you shall say, 'We will not ride on horses, nor go on foot. Carry us in our boat.' And you shall be carried in your boat." Grand Princess Olga's response to the Drevlian emissaries. That's what that was. On the morrow, Olga met the messengers near the river, as promised. When they repeated the words she had instructed them to speak, the people of Kiev grabbed the Drevlian boats, and with the ambassadors in them, carried them over their heads. As they were paraded across the Rus capital, the Drevlians thought Olga was paying them a great honor. That is, until the procession reached her court, where a deep trench had been dug overnight. The Rus unceremoniously tipped over the boat, threw their enemies in the ditch, and buried them alive. While they were being covered with earth and stone, Olga asked them whether they found the honor to their taste. Yes. Oh, yes. I just see her like standing over the pit. How do you like me now, motherfuckers? Rough. She was a rough lady. Grand Prince Igor extracting tribute. Okay. A bloody feast with the Drevlians. Immediately, the Grand Princess took the next step of her vengeful plan. She sent a message to Prince Mal, who was still in the Drevlian homeland. Olga asked him to send his most distinguished men to her in Kiev, so that she might go to their prince with due honor, to marry Mal. Unaware of the fate of the first party, Prince Mal was elated by Olga's positive response. He gathered his best men and sent them to the Rus capital. When they arrived, the Grand Princess ordered her people to draw their visitors a nice hot bath. She asked the Drevlian men to meet her after they had bathed. Weary from the long journey, the emissaries eagerly entered the bathhouse. Olga now played her next trick. She had her people set fire to the buildings, starting with the doorways. The ambassadors were burned alive inside. Olga burning the Drevlian messengers. Olga setting fire to the bathhouse containing the Drevlian messengers. Upping the ante, Olga now sent another message to the Drevlian homeland. She ordered Prince Mal to prepare great quantities of mead in the city where you killed my husband, that I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast for him. Olga then finally traveled to Koristan, the capital of the Drevlians. Prince Mal probably found it pretty suspicious, I don't think he did, that both his diplomatic parties had not returned, but unwilling to spurn his future wife, he duly threw a funeral feast, for her when she arrived. The Drevlians thirsted after all the mead they had gathered, and soon engaged in heavy drinking. Olga and her followers played along, but went easy on the booze. When all the attending Drevlians were drunk as a lord, the Grand Princess ordered her relatively sober retinue to kill their hosts, egging them on to avenge the murder of Igor. It was a downright massacre. So apparently they killed 5,000. 5,000 people in that little ordeal. The Siege of Khorestan. One could be forgiven for thinking that by now the debt of the Drevlians had been paid, but not in the eyes of Olga. She returned home and gathered an army post-haste to crush whatever was left of the Drevlian tribe. The war began extremely favorably for the Kievan Rus. They won several battles and drove the Drevlians into their cities. However, that's when problems started to appear for Olga. Khorestan, in particular, withstood her siege for over a year. Never known to lack creativity, Olga sent the city's inhabitants another message. Why do you persist in holding out? All your cities have surrendered to me and submitted to tribute, so that the inhabitants now cultivate their fields and their lands in peace. But you had rather die of hunger without submitting to tribute. The people of Khorestan responded that they were willing to pay tribute again, but not without cause. Added that they were afraid that Olga was still intent on taking revenge for her husband's death. Trying to assuage their fears, Olga answered that the slaughter of the two embassies and the events of the funeral feast were enough for her. She added a seemingly small request. Give me 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house. The besieged Drevlians, delighted that the Grand Princess showed her merciful side, did as she asked and sent her the birds. Olga, overseeing the siege of Khorestan. Inside the city, people were already celebrating the end of the war, for such a small price at that. But in her camp next to the city, Olga ordered her soldiers to attach sulfur and a piece of cloth to the birds' feet. At night, they set the cloth on fire and released the birds, who duly flew back to their nests in town. A swarm of burning birds came down on Khorestan, which mostly contained wooden buildings. Within moments, the city was ablaze. As one source put it, there was not a house that was not consumed, and it was impossible to extinguish the flames because all the houses caught fire at once. And that was the Primary Chronicle, a 12th century compilation of Kievan Rus history. As the Drevlians fled their burning capital, Olga had thousands of them slaughtered. Others she gave as slaves to her followers. Whoever remained was left to pay tribute to the Rus once more. Okay, so that was her final act of revenge. And quite the amazing thing. Birds, I don't know if you know this, but they always fly back to their house. And she knew that, apparently. So, set a bird on fire and it's going to go straight back to its house. Pretty brilliant, if you ask me. All right, so why is Olga of Kiev considered a saint? Although the repression of the Drevlian uprising may paint a picture of Olga as a vindictive widow, her historical reputation is altogether different. She spent her later years strengthening and centralizing the young Rus state. Significantly, she transferred power to her son when he reached maturity, continuing Igor's dynasty. But what really established Olga's positive image for the ages to come were her religious endeavors. Whilst visiting Constantinople, the Byzantine capital, in the 950s, she converted to Christianity, and she did much to spread her new religion to the Kievan Rus. Saint Olga of Kiev. The usual way to depict Olga of Kiev as a devout saint, her crackdown on the Drevlians, however, tells a completely different story indeed. They were at first downright hostile to the idea. her son Svatoslav even refused to be baptized. But Olga carried on regardless and had several churches constructed throughout the Rus lands. Most of her subjects nevertheless remained pagan while she lived. But after she passed away, Olga's mission turned out to be a great success. 20 years after her death, her grandson, Grand Prince Vladimir the Great, famously converted to Christianity. Because of her proselytizing influence, Olga of Kiev is venerated as a saint in both the Roman Catholic Church as well as the Russian Orthodox Church. The latter even honorifically calls her equal to the apostles. But the vicious slaughter of most of the Drevlian tribe during her early regency probably makes Olga the most genocidal saint who ever lived. Olga was a regent of Kievan Rus for her son Svatoslav from 945 until 960. Following her baptism, Olga took the name Elena. She is known for her subjugation of the Drevlians, a tribe that killed her husband Igor, even though it was her grandson Vladimir who adopted Christianity and made it the state religion. She was the first ruler to be baptized. Okay. Early life. While Olga's birth date is unknown, it could be as early as 890 AD and as late as 925 AD. Again, the chronicles differ and the sources differ on those times. According to the primary chronicle, Olga was of Varangian origin and was born in Pleskov. Little is known about her life before her marriage to Prince Igor of Kiev and the birth of their son Svatoslav. According to Alexei Karpov, a specialist in the history of ancient Russia, Olga was no more than 15 years old at the time of her marriage. Igor was the son and heir of Rurik, founder of the Rurik dynasty. After his father's death, Igor was under the guardianship of Oleg, who had consolidated power in the region, conquering neighboring tribes and establishing the capital in Kiev. This loose tribal federation became known as the Kievan Rus, a territory covering what are now parts of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And again, we're going to be going over this stuff, and you're going to hear the same kind of stuff. But I did want you to hear it from different viewpoints. And each one has some additional information of its own. All right, the Drevlians were a neighboring tribe with which the growing Kievan Rus Empire had a complex relationship. The Drevlians had joined Kievan Rus in military campaigns and paid tribute to Igor's predecessors. They stopped paying tribute upon Oleg's death and instead gave money to a local warlord. In 945, Igor set out to the Drevlian capital, Eskoristan, to force the tribe to pay tribute to the Kievan Rus. Confronted by Igor's larger army, the Drevlians backed down and paid him. As Igor and his army rode home, however, he decided the payment was not enough and returned, with only a small escort, seeking more tribute. Upon his arrival in the territory, the Drevlians murdered Igor. According to the Byzantine chronicler Leo the Deacon, Igor's death was caused by a gruesome act of torture in which he was captured by them, tied to tree trunks, and torn in two. D. Sullivan has suggested that Leo may have invented this sensationalist version of Igor's death, taking inspiration from Diodorus Siculus's account of a similar killing method used by the robber Sinis, who lived near the Isthmus of Corinth and was killed by Theseus. Okay, regency. The personal symbols of Rurik, Igor, Olga, and Svatoslav. After Igor's death in 945, Olga ruled the Kievan Rus as regent on behalf of their son Svatoslav. She was the first woman to rule the Kievan Rus. Little is known about Olga's tenure as the ruler of Kiev, but the primary chronicler does give an account of her association to the throne and her bloody revenge on the Drevlians for the murder of her husband, as well as some insight into her role as civil leader of the Kievan people. According to archaeologist Sergei Beletsky, Knyazhnia Olga, like all the other rulers before Vladimir the Great, was also using the bident as her personal symbol. Drevlian uprising. After Igor's death at the hands of the Drevlians, Olga assumed the throne because her 3-year-old was too young to rule. The Drevlians, emboldened by their success in ambushing and killing the king, sent a messenger to Olga, proposing that she marry his murderer, Prince Mal. Okay, so same story again. 20 Drevlian negotiators boated to Kiev to pass along their king's message to ensure Olga's compliance. They arrived in her court and told the queen why they were in Kiev, to report that they had slain her husband and that Olga should come and marry their Prince Mal. Olga responded, "Your proposal is pleasing to me. Indeed, my husband cannot rise again from the dead, but I desire to honor you tomorrow in the presence of my people. Return now to your boat and remain there with an aspect of arrogance. I shall send for you on the morrow, and you shall say, 'We will not ride on horses, nor go on foot. Carry us in our boat,' and you shall be carried in your boat." When the Drevlians returned the next day, they waited outside Olga's court to receive the honor she had promised. When they repeated the words she had told them to say, the people of Kiev rose up, carrying the Drevlians in their boat. The ambassadors believed this was great honor, as if they were being carried by palanquin. The people brought them into the court, where they were dropped into a trench that had been dug the day before under Olga's orders, where the ambassadors were buried alive. It is written that Olga bent down to watch them as they were buried and inquired whether they found the honor to their taste. Olga then sent a message to the Drevlians that they should send their distinguished men to honor her in Kiev, so that she might go to their prince with due honor. The Drevlians, unaware of the fate of the first diplomatic party, gathered another party of men to send, the best men who governed the land of Drevia. When they arrived, Olga commanded her people to draw them a bath, and invited the men to appear before her after they had bathed. When the Drevlians entered the bathhouse, Olga had it set on fire from the doors, so that all the Drevlians within burned to death. So quite vicious. A vicious revenge, and very cunning. Olga sent another message to the Drevlians, this time ordering them to prepare great quantities of mead in the city where you killed my husband. That should be your first clue. That should be your first clue. That I may weep over his grave and hold a funeral feast for him. When Olga and a small group of attendants arrived at Igor's tomb, she did indeed weep and hold a funeral feast. The Drevlians sat down to join them and began to drink heavily. When the Drevlians were drunk, she ordered her followers to kill them, and went about herself egging on her retinue to the massacre of the Drevlians. According to the primary chronicle, 5,000 Drevlians were killed on this night, but Olga returned to Kiev to prepare an army to finish off the survivors. The initial conflict between the armies of the two nations went very well for the forces of the Kievan Rus, who won the battle handily and drove the survivors back into their cities. Olga then led her army to Iskaristan, what is today Kuristan, the city where her husband had been slain, and laid siege to the city. The siege lasted for a year without success when Olga thought of a plan to trick the Drevlians. She sent them a message. "Why do you persist in holding out? All your cities have surrendered to me and submitted to tribute, so that the inhabitants now cultivate their fields and their lands in peace, but you had rather die of hunger without submitting to tribute." The Drevlians responded that they would submit to tribute, but that they were afraid she was still intent on avenging her husband. Olga answered that the murder of the messengers sent to Kiev, as well as the events of the feast night, had been enough for her. She then asked them for a small request. "Give me 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each house." The Drevlians rejoiced at the prospect of the siege ending for so small a price, and did as she asked. Olga then instructed her army to attach a piece of sulfur bound with small pieces of cloth to each bird. At nightfall, Olga told her soldiers to set the pieces aflame and release the birds. They returned to their nests within the city, which subsequently set the city ablaze. As the primary chronicle tells it, there was not a house that was not consumed, and it was impossible to extinguish the flames, because all the houses caught fire at once. As the people fled the burning city, Olga ordered her soldiers to catch them, killing some of them and giving others as slaves to her followers. She left the remnant to pay tribute. Governance. Olga remained regent ruler of Kievan Rus with the support of the army and her people. She changed the system of tribute gathering, poliudi, in the first legal reform recorded in Eastern Europe. She continued to evade proposals of marriage, defended the city during the siege of Kiev in 968, and saved the power of the throne for her son. After her dramatic subjugation of the Drevlians, the primary chronicle recounts how Olga passed through the land of Drevia accompanied by her son and her retinue, establishing laws and tribute. Her trading posts and hunting reserves are there still. As queen, Olga established trading posts and collected tribute along the Mista and the Luga rivers. She established hunting grounds, boundary posts, towns, and trading posts across the empire. Olga's work helped to centralize state rule with these trade centers, called pagosti, which served as administrative centers in addition to their mercantile roles. Olga's network of pagosti would prove important in the ethnic and cultural unification of the Rus people, and her border posts began the establishment of national boundaries for the kingdom. During her son's prolonged military campaigns, she remained in charge of Kiev, residing in the castle of Vyshgorod with her grandsons. Christianity. The Limko Church of Saints Vladimir and Olga, now located at the Museum of National Folk Architecture and Rural Life in Lviv. The primary chronicle does not go into additional detail about Olga's time as regent, but does tell the story of her conversion to Christianity and subsequent effect on the acceptance of Christianity in Eastern Europe. Conversion. In the 950s, Olga traveled to Constantinople, the capital city of the Byzantine Empire, to visit Emperor Constantine. Once in Constantinople, Olga converted to Christianity with the assistance of the emperor and patriarch. While the primary chronicle does not divulge Olga's motivation for her visit or conversion, it does go into great detail on the conversion process, in which she was baptized and instructed in the ways of Christianity. The reigning emperor was named Constantine, son of Leo. Olga came before him, and when he saw that she was very fair of countenance and wise as well, the emperor wondered at her intellect. He conversed with her and remarked that she was worthy to reign with him in his city. When Olga heard his words, she replied that she was still a pagan, and that if he desired to baptize her, he should perform this function himself. Otherwise, she was unwilling to accept baptism. The emperor, with the assistance of the patriarch, accordingly baptized her. When Olga was enlightened, she rejoiced in soul and body. The patriarch, who instructed her in the faith, said to her, "Blessed art thou among the women of the Rus, for thou hast loved the light and quit the darkness. The sons of Rus shall bless thee to the last generation of thy descendants." He taught her the doctrine of the church and instructed her in prayer and fasting, in almsgiving, and in the maintenance of chastity. She bowed her head, and like a sponge absorbing water, she eagerly drank in his teachings. The princess bowed before the patriarch, saying, "Through thy prayers, Holy Father, may I be preserved from the crafts and assaults of the devil." Okay, so I'm here to tell you, in no uncertain terms, that Olga, as wise as she was, did not go to Constantinople without knowing everything there was to know about Christianity already, and also with the intent to convert for political and tactical reasons. While it does seem that she converted in both her heart and mind, I believe it was the mind that led her first. She already knew about the rule that a goddaughter could not marry a godfather, I assure you. While not found in available text, this I know. An intelligent woman does not enter any situation without understanding whom she meets. She studied before she went, and any training she received while there was met with fake awe for onlookers. It was a show. Okay? So thank you so much for teaching me all this stuff that I already knew before I got here. For real. Okay, continuing on. At her baptism, she was christened Helena, after the ancient empress, mother of Constantine the Great. The patriarch then blessed her and dismissed her. While the primary chronicle notes that Olga was christened with the name Helena, after the ancient saint Helena, the mother of Constantine the Great, Jonathan Shepherd argues that Olga's baptismal name comes from the contemporary emperor's wife, Helena. The observation that Olga was worthy to reign with him in his city suggests that the emperor was interested in marrying her, while the chronicle explains Constantine's desire to take Olga as his wife as stemming from the fact that she was fair of countenance and wise as well. Marrying Olga could certainly have helped him gain power over the Rus. The chronicle recounts that Olga asked the emperor to baptize her, knowing that his baptismal sponsorship, by the rules of spiritual kinship, would make marriage between them a kind of spiritual incest. Though her desire to become Christian may have been genuine, this request was also a way for her to maintain political independence. She's so smart. So smart. It's like ridiculous. After the baptism, when Constantine repeated his marriage proposal, Olga answered that she could not marry him since the church law forbade a goddaughter to marry her godfather. After her baptism, Emperor summoned Olga and made known to her that he wished her to become his wife, but she replied, "How can you marry me after yourself baptizing me and calling me your daughter? For among Christians that is unlawful, as you yourself must know." And then the emperor said, "Olga, you have outwitted me." He gave her many gifts of gold, silver, silks in various vases, and dismissed her, still calling her his daughter. Oops. Sorry about your luck. Francis Butler argues that the story of the proposal was a literary embellishment. Once again, she couldn't possibly be that smart. That's an embellishment. Describing an event that is highly unlikely to have ever actually occurred. In fact, at the time of her baptism, Constantine already had an empress. In addition to uncertainty over the truth of the chronicle's telling of events in Constantinople, there is controversy over the details of her conversion to Christianity. According to Russian sources, she was baptized in Constantinople in 957. Byzantine sources, however, indicate that she was a Christian prior to her 957 visit. I believe she was. I believe she had already converted, or at least studied and knew that she was going to convert. I think it was already a done deal. And it was that, and the trip was just a political sojourn to solidify that, with Constantinople. Okay. It seems likely that she was baptized in Kiev around 955. Following a second christening in Constantinople, took the Christian name Helen. Olga was not the first person from Rus to convert from her pagan ways. There were Christians in Igor's court who had taken oaths to the St. Elias Church in Kievan for the Rus. Byzantine Treaty 945. But she was the most powerful Rus individual to undergo baptism during her life. Efforts to Christianize Kievan Rus. The primary chronicle reports that Olga received the patriarch's blessing for her journey home, and that once she arrived, she unsuccessfully attempted to convert her son to Christianity. Now Olga dwelt with her son Svatoslav. She urged him to be baptized, but he would not listen to her suggestion. Though when any man wished to be baptized, he was not hindered, but only mocked. For to the infidels, the Christian faith is foolishness. They do not comprehend it, because they walk in darkness and do not see the glory of the Lord. Their hearts are hardened, and they can neither hear with their ears nor see with their eyes. For Solomon has said, "The deeds of the unrighteous are far from wisdom. Inasmuch as I have called you, and ye heard me not, I sharpened my words, and ye understood not. But ye have set at naught all my counsel, and would have none of my reproach. For they have hated knowledge, and the fear of Jehovah they have not chosen. They would none of my counsel, but despised all my reproof." This passage highlights the hostility towards Christianity in Kievan Rus in the 10th century. In the Chronicle, Svatoslav declares that his followers would laugh if he were to accept Christianity. While Olga tried to convince her son that his followers would follow his example if he converted, her efforts were in vain. However, her son agreed not to persecute those in his kingdom who did convert, which marked a crucial turning point for Christianity in the era. Despite the resistance of her people to Christianity, Olga built churches in Kiev, Pskov, and elsewhere. Relations with the Holy Roman Emperor. 7 Latin sources document Olga's embassy to Holy Roman Emperor Otto I in 959. The continuation of Regino of Prum mentions that the envoys requested the emperor to appoint a bishop and priests for their nation. The chronicler accuses the envoys of lies, commenting that their trick was not exposed until later. Theitmar of Merseburg says that the first archbishop of Magdeburg, Adalbert of Magdeburg, before being promoted to this high rank, was sent by Emperor Otto to the country of the Rus as a simple bishop, but was expelled by pagan allies of Sviatoslav. The same data is repeated in the annals of Quedlinburg and Hildesheim. Once again, her efforts to create an unmatched level of autonomy for her kingdom are unable to be downplayed in this instance due to multiple agreeing source texts available. So they can't argue these, and they can't say, well, it's made up and it's a fantasy and it's embellished, because it's delineated in multiple different sources. So for a woman, you need that, or it's just a fantastical tale. Sarcasm on my part, but if you closely evaluate these writers, you will begin to notice this double standard in academia. I've mentioned it before, but it's a sore point. It's a sticking point for me. I'll definitely point it out every time I see it. Okay, in 2018, Russian historian and writer Boris Akunin pointed out the importance of a 2-year gap between invitation and arrival of bishops. The failure of Olga's Byzantine trip has inflicted a severe blow to her party. The Grand Kinyaginya, made a second attempt to find a Christian patron, now in the West, but it seems in the period between the sending of the embassy to Emperor Otto in 959 and the arrival of Adalbert in Kiev in 961, a bloodless coup took place. Pagan party prevailed. The young Svatoslav pushed his mother into the background, and that's why the German bishops had to return empty-handed. According to Russian historian Vladimir Petrukin, Olga invited the Roman Rite bishop because she wanted to motivate Byzantine priests to catechize the Rus people more enthusiastically by introducing competition. All right, death. According to the primary chronicle, Olga died from illness in 969, soon after the Pecheneg siege of the city. When Svatoslav announced plans to move his throne to the Danube region, the ailing Olga convinced him to stay with her during her final days. Only 3 days later, she died, and her family and larger parts of Kievan Rus mourned. Svatoslav announced to his mother and his boyars, "I do not care to remain in Kiev, but should prefer to live in Petroslavets on the Danube, since that is the center of my realm, where all riches are concentrated, gold, silks, wine, and various fruits from Greece, silver and horses from Hungary and Bohemia, and from Rus furs, wax, honey, and slaves." But Olga made reply, "You behold me in my weakness. Why do you desire to depart from me? Then to go," for she was already in precarious health. She thus remonstrated with him and begged him first to bury her and then to go wheresoever he would. 3 days later, Olga died. Her son wept for her with great mourning, as did likewise her grandsons and all the people. They thus carried her out and buried her in her tomb. Olga had given command not to hold a funeral feast for her, for she had a priest who performed the last rites over the sainted princess. Although he disapproved of his mother's Christian tradition, Svatoslav heeded Olga's request that her priest Gregory conduct a Christian funeral without the ritual pagan burial feast. Her tomb remained in Kiev for over 2 centuries, but was destroyed by Mongolian Tartar armies of Batu Khan in 1240. This illuminates the love he held for her, and the respect, as he had staunchly remained pagan but chose to honor her last wishes. So she was held in very high regard by her family, by the people. It's important to recognize that. Legacy, sainthood. At the time of her death, it seemed that Olga's attempt to make Kievan Rus a Christian territory had been a failure. Nonetheless, Olga's Christianizing mission would be brought to fruition by her grandson Vladimir, who officially adopted Christianity in 988. The primary chronicle highlights Olga's holiness in contrast to the pagans around her during her life, as well as the significance of her decision to convert to Christianity. Olga was the precursor of the Christian land, even as the day spring precedes the sun, and as the dawn precedes the day. For she shone like the moon by night. She was radiant among the infidels like a pearl in the mire. Since the people were soiled and not yet purified of their sin by holy baptism. But she herself was cleansed by this sacred purification. She was the first from the Rus to enter the kingdom of God, and the sons of Rus thus praised her as their leader, for since her death she has interceded with God on their behalf. It is unclear when Olga was canonized, but John Fennell argued that this was most likely in 1284, together with Vladimir, when Metropolitan Maxim summoned the bishops to a council, and was recorded the next year visiting all the Russian land, teaching, instructing, and administering, and spreading news about their canonization, including in Novgorod and Pskov. A northern Russian manuscript from the 15th century mentions that when Vladimir unearthed the body of Olga, his grandmother, and discovered that it was uncorrupted, he then placed it in a wooden coffin in the Church of the Tithe. In 1547, nearly 600 years after her 969 death, the Russian Orthodox Church officially named Olga a saint, equal to the apostles. Because of her proselytizing influence, the Eastern Orthodox Church, the Ruthenian Greek Catholic Church, and the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church all call Olga by the honorific apostolos, equal to the apostles. Olga's feast day is July 11th, the date of her death. The Orthodox Church of Ukraine celebrates her memory on 24th of July. In keeping with her own biography, she is the patron of widows and converts. The honorific title, equal to the apostles, was first given to her on the initiative of Archimandrite Innocenti Prosvernin in the 1980s. That honorific is pretty heady when you consider how the first source downplayed her importance, as many do. Equal to the apostles is a pretty fucking big deal. Olga is venerated as saint in East Slavic-speaking countries, where churches use Byzantine Rite. Eastern Orthodox Church, especially in Russian Orthodox Church, Greek Catholic Church, especially in the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church, in churches with Byzantine Rite Lutheranism, and among Western Catholics in Russia. So she's got a feast day. The July 11th is the main commemoration. 25th of May. Synaxis of Saints of Volhynia. She's got multiple, and then it goes on to talk about all the churches and monuments that are named after her, and there's just a ton. I won't list off all those. Scholarship has traditionally focused on Olga's role in the spread of Christianity to Eastern Europe and Russia, as well as her role in advising her son against persecution of Christians in the Kievan Rus. Modern publications, on the other hand, reflect a broader interest in Olga beyond her role in expanding Christendom, detailing her story. A 2018 article claimed she showed her countrymen how a woman could rule with strength and decision. The Russian primary chronicles claim that Olga was of Viking descent, also received attention for its possible contribution to her warrior spirit. Thomas Crawwell has commented, if any saint bad to the bone, it was Olga. If any saint was bad to the bone, it was Olga, Princess of Kiev. She took viciousness to a new level. Russian historian Boris Akunin argues that though she certainly reconquered the Drevlians, only her killing of their first envoy is plausible, of course, since Iskorostan was just 2 days' ride from Kiev, making it difficult to conceal the first public murder. Look, if she did those two things, like in a matter of days, it's perfectly conceivable. Perfectly conceivable. All right. Yeah, so I think that pretty much sums it up. That's the end of that source, and that was our final source. So to round out this dive into the life of Olga, I'd like to point out that in spite of her having an incredible and far-reaching influence on history, she is barely mentioned when it comes to study or documentary of the era, and that's a shame, especially when you consider how well she is documented in historical texts. I am doing this because I want more people to know who she was and the influence she had. Females don't get enough credit for their contributions in history. Hers were many. She inspires me for her courage. With a great mind, much is possible. Olga is a shining example of love's strongest commitments. Her revenge was devastating, but once it was done, she continued her life without ever marrying again, but ruled with care for her people and wisdom. We should all strive to be this epic. Thank you for joining me. Please like and share. I appreciate you all for your support as we start this channel and attempt to provide you with some entertainment and education. Much love, and don't forget to check out our Facebook group called Plenty O Viking. Thank you.